what is sanctification? What do we mean when we say that God sanctifies us? Sanctification is a work of God's free grace. So notice, this is God's work. Sanctification isn't a work that we perform, although it's a work which God performs that causes us to work. Sanctification is a work of God's free grace whereby we are renewed in the whole man, in our entire being, after the image of God. Essentially being remade in our whole man after God's own image, and are enabled in sanctification by God's working. We're enabled more and more to die unto sin and live unto righteousness. So there's 3 parts to this that I want to 4 really, that I want to look at. First of all, this is a work of God. Sanctification, make no mistake about it, sanctification is God's work in us to work. So sanctification is God's work. Do we do good works? Certainly we perform good works. But be clear when you speak of sanctification that sanctification is a work of God in us. God's working in us. Okay? And what is he working in us toward? He's working in us toward, so this is the second thing then, to make us new after recreating us after his own image. Renewing his image in us, which was defaced in the fall. Does man still retain a resemblance to the image of God after the fall? Most certainly. In Genesis chapter number 9, when civil government really is instituted in Genesis chapter number 9, and man is told that if a man sheds man's blood, that man should shed that man's blood. The reason given is because man is made after the image of God. So right then, there's a justification that man still has the image of God. However, it's been effaced. It's been marred. Okay, so in sanctification, God works in us to continue to shape us after his image, to really create us to be really human again. Not for us to be God. When God creates us after his image, it doesn't mean that God is making little gods. He's making us really back to what humanity should be, recreating us to be fully human as he intended. And there's 2 ways then that this is accomplished. So we've looked at sanctification as God's work. It's toward the end that we would then reflect his image. We're being recreated in the whole man. And there's 2 ways that this takes place. And this is where I think it's going to be particularly helpful. We die more and more to sin and live more and more to righteousness. That's 2 aspects then to sanctification, where more and more sin is put to death in us, and we're enabled more and more to put sin to death, lest we be put to death by it, right? That's what John Owen said. So more and more in sanctification, as God works in us to will and to do after his good pleasure, more and more in that we're able to kill sin, to put it to death. But not only that, but caused more and more to live unto righteousness. And this is then the opposite of what we put to death. We're not only out, this is one thing that I don't like about a lot of people. They're just against everything. But in this case, you can see we're not only against sin. We're to live for something. We're to be something. And that is to live more and more into righteousness. So by all means, mortify sin. Put it to death, lest it put you to death. Kill it, lest it kill you. Okay, that's what God is doing in sanctification. He's working in us to do that. But it's not just that. We're also to be vivified, revitalized, live more and more to righteousness. So put sin to death, live unto righteousness. To be recreated, and it's a work of God. That's what sanctification is. I hope that's helpful to you. I'll see you in the next one. I wish you well.